What's up? What's up, guys? Normally, at this part, I'd be like, hey, what's up? Let's dive into Revelation chapter 13. But we're not. Not today. Not today. Instead, we're gonna actually dive deep into a chapter way in the Old Testament, the book of Daniel chapter 2. And chapter 2, and we'll cover Daniel chapter 7 next. They're very, very crucial for understanding Revelation chapter 13. This Revelation chapter 13, it's a really important chapter, and a lot of people are really interested in it, and it's really important to really understand it. So, of course, there's a lot of Old Testament prophecy and stuff that lines up with the book of Revelation, and we've talked a lot about it in those videos about the chapters. But this stuff is so intricate and so key to understanding it, we're covering them individually. So today we're covering Daniel chapter 2. And so the book of Daniel, it's set in the Babylonian exile. So Daniel and his friends, they're all exiled to Babylon, and King Nebuchadnezzar II has this dream. And he's got all these astrologers, he's got all these enchanters, magicians, and they can't interpret this dream. They say, no, king, however great and mighty, you can't ask that thing of us. It's too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, but they do not live among humans. So they can't do it. They don't even try. They blatantly just say, no, we can't do this stuff. So out of a mad fit of rage, what does King Nebuchadnezzar do? He orders the killing of all wise men in Babylon, all of them. And that includes Daniel and his friends. So as this executor of sorts appointed by Nebuchadnezzar, he's going after Daniel and his friends. He takes them, his name's Arioch, and Daniel says to him, no, don't execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I can interpret that dream. So he does, and Nebuchadnezzar's like, all right, interpret it. So then the next day, they come back after a lot of praying from Daniel. He is given this interpretation of the dream from the Holy Spirit, essentially. And he starts in verse 31 of Daniel chapter 2. We're looking at the dream now. As Daniel's talking, says, Your Majesty, meaning Nebuchadnezzar, Your Majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, and its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, and its legs of iron, and the feet and toes are partly iron and baked clay. And then while you were watching the statue, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. And then the entire statue, that of iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold, broke into pieces and broke down in the middle of summer. And the wind just swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. So that's the dream. And now we'll look at Daniel's interpretation of this dream. It says in verse 36, This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. Your Majesty, you are the King of kings, and the God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the earth and the birds of the sky. So we remember Babylonians really almost like the third giant kingdom. We had the Egyptians and the Assyrians, and now we're looking at these giant world-governing, essentially, power. And they have just complete control. And it says, wherever they live, he has made you, Nebuchadnezzar, ruler over them. You are that head of pure gold. So Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire is the head of pure gold. And he goes on to say in verse 39, come on, birds. It's like an entire flock thingy of birds. says in verse 39, after you, another kingdom will arise, inferior to yours. And that's the silver, since silver is inferior to gold, but the kingdom is still taking over Babylon. And that kingdom is the Medo-Persians. So, if you don't know the story, one night in Babylon, everybody drinking and stuff, they're having a good time, even the soldiers and the guards are drinking. And so the Medo-Persians, it's actually the Medes and the Persians, they essentially just combined forces with King Cyrus the Great and King Darius. They had to combine forces if they wanted even a chance at taking over Babylon. So right when Babylon's guard is down, they, just like that, take over the whole city. And since it's all these ancient times, you take over the capital city, then you have the entire empire. That's not necessarily true today, but it definitely was back then. So the second kingdom is the Medo-Persian Empire. And then next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole world, and that's the Greeks. We saw the great conqueror, Alexander the Great, takes over the Medo-Persians, big Greek empire, doesn't really last that long. And it says, finally there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom, yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even though there's iron mixed with clay. So this fourth kingdom, which we know as the Roman Empire, strong as iron, they smash everything. And we know the Roman Empire, they're just, bang, they're just whooping everybody's butt. But then we know with the fall of the Roman Empire towards the end of the 5th century AD, they divided up into two halves, the West and East. The East Roman Empire ends up it's sometimes called the Byzantine Empire, ends up turning into the Holy Roman Empire, which the papacy takes over and stuff. And then the West, they divide up into 10 kingdoms. So me, being an absolute expert at remembering things, remembered pretty much none of them. And they're all like right here, all listed right here. There's the 10 kingdoms that Rome divided up into. So Rome, partly of iron, they still got a lot of strength with them, but they're also divided and brittle and weak like clay. And remember, this is during the Babylonian Empire. So all these things haven't happened yet, and through the Spirit, Daniel is interpreting these things to happen, and they happen just as Daniel said that they would. And we can read in verse 42, as the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle, like we just said. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united, for any more than iron mixes with clay. So these people, not just the kingdoms divided, the people themselves are divided. And a lot of the times we attribute the fall of the united Roman Empire to the Vandals. They pretty much ransacked all of Rome, and the Vandals, they're one of the 10 kingdoms that were up here at some point. And that's where we even get the term vandalization, because they just ransacked the whole city. And they were Romans, and they didn't really like the Romans. So they pretty much rebelled, ransacked the city, and they were a divided people. So that's what verse 43 is predicting there. Verse 44, in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it itself will endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of the mountain, but not by human hands. A rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, the gold, all of them to pieces, left them to dust. And the great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. These dreams are true, and the interpretation is trustworthy. So this huge mountain, it's almost like another kingdom. It's God's kingdom, the eternal kingdom. not just the millennial kingdom, but the new earth, new heaven, this eternal kingdom that everybody just forgets about everything else. There's no trace at all of the old kingdom. Even though they seem great and powerful, there's not even a trace when compared to God's kingdom. And how God's kingdom will rule and reign and all that good stuff. So that's what Daniel chapter 2 is. It's all these prophesying about the Roman Empire and those great empires right before. So Daniel chapter 7 is going to talk a lot more about the Roman Empire, predicting a lot more about the Roman Empire, and actually predicting a revival in sense of the Roman Empire, and how through the roots of the Roman Empire we will see that one world empire that we've talked about a few times throughout here. So that's what Daniel chapter 2 is. So it's kind of crazy stuff to think about, but it's really just one big statue that's just imagery of kingdoms. And then a huge mountain, rock mountain, it's God's kingdom, all right? Not too complicated, but we got to just get that base of knowledge before we dive into Daniel chapter 7 and then before we dive into Revelation chapter 13. So I hope you soak this stuff up. I really, really hope that you watch all of these videos of Daniel chapter 2 before we dive into chapter 7 and before we dive into Revelation chapter 13. So, yeah, that's it. Love you guys. Peace.